Hello and welcome, dear listeners, to this early preview of Haunted UK Fiction, a sister podcast to The Haunted UK, which features original flash fiction, short stories, and novellas with paranormal themes. All stories you will hear were written by a collection of talented writers, authors, and storytellers, both independent and professional. In the lead-up to our rapidly approaching launch date of the 1st of October, we've decided to give you a sneak peek at what's to come. Today's episode features a story by James West titled HMP Signal's End. James wrote this story on a particularly quiet night shift whilst working as a prison officer. Being a bit of a train spotter himself, he decided to combine his work and his hobby, which yielded the idea of the rail-fed prison, HMP Signal's End. In his own words, ghost stories are always fun to write, and he considered a ghost train to be a niche topic yet to be covered, so it seemed logical to him to follow that path. So get comfortable, grab a little something to sip on, perhaps cuddle up under a blanket to help offset the chills coming your way. And let's dive into the story. HMP Signal's End is a Category B male prison situated in the middle of Sussex, 10 miles from any town or village. There is no road to the prison. Built over an old branch line, the only way to get there is by train, and it is the only prison in the country that cannot be reached in any other way. Staff, prisoners, and supplies are all delivered to the prison via the old branch line that terminates within the prison walls. There are timed trains in and out of the prison for visitors. Once a day, there is a secure train holding new inmates, and throughout the day, specially timed trains are available for staff to enter and leave according to their shifts. A mile down track is a level crossing, and a signal box manned by trained prison staff. It is here that my story takes place. Officer Miller gave a panicked pant as he walked alone in the dark down the centre of the railway tracks, his maglite torch searching the path in front of him frantically. "I'm getting too old for this shit," he told himself as he glanced towards the well-lit prison a good half a mile behind him. He continued to walk along the track, his light shining in every direction, searching for the source of the whispers and rustling he could hear. Not only this night, but every shift he travelled along this seemingly never-ending torturous route to the signal box. After what seemed like an hour, he finally reached his destination. He could hear the low hum of a radio from inside the box and felt a little safer. The warmth from within seemed to bring him to his senses and calm him down as he hung his prison service's high-visibility jacket on the hook behind the door. "You all right, Dave?" asked the officer sitting at the desk, his feet resting on top of the control board with a mug of tea in his hand. "Same old," Dave replied in his strong Devon accent as he beelined for the kettle on the other side of the room. The young officer at the desk laughed and swiveled his chair to face Dave. "Don't know why you shit yourself so much walking here, mate. It's a load of crap what they say. I googled it," Dave snorted as he stirred his coffee. What did this boy know? He was young, oblivious, and more importantly, he'd never done a night shift in the signal box at HMP Signal's End. "Just gives me the creeps," he mumbled, lowering himself into a chair at the control board. The young officer stared at Dave for a few seconds, holding his chin before standing up and stretching with a yawn. "Right, well, I'm off. Catch you tomorrow, Dave," he announced, picking his bag up from the floor before swiftly exiting the room. Dave watched on one of the CCTV monitors as the young officer wandered off down the track. He waited for a few minutes before kicking himself into gear. Putting his mug down on the desk, he reached to his radio pouch, pulled his radio out and held it a few inches from his mouth before pressing the transmit button.
"Hello, Control from number 2. That's me at the signal box now. Over.
He said as clear as he could before releasing the button. A few seconds of silence passed before he heard,
Receive November 2 and good luck. Control standing by.
This humoured response from the prison's control room staff made him smile weakly. Clearly, they had an idea what his shift in a lonely signal box was like. Placing the radio back in his pouch, he stood up and looked around the room. Primarily made of wood, the signal box was brightly lit, with big open windows on 3 sides. Outside the windows was the countryside, which he knew to be very beautiful during the day. But now in the winter darkness, it was nothing but a mass of black, marred only by the distant glow of the prison lights. The control board looked out of place in the tiny room with its modern-style red buttons and stainless steel body. It also supported the monitors for the CCTV, 2 for the cameras watching the platforms at the prison, and 2 overlooking the level crossing next to the little signal box Dave was currently in. The role of the officer in the signal box was very simple. His job was to control the one and only junction point situated 3/4 of a mile down the line toward the prison. This point switched between the lines for the staff platform outside the walls and the prison platform within the prison itself. The only other job was to open and close the level crossing gates. This was the extent of the tasks assigned to those working the signal box, so for many it was a good job to have, at least during the day. The position offered them the opportunity to sit and relax for hours at a time, whilst doing minimal work. For Dave, the job started as a way of mixing his hobby of train spotting with his work. He started out working days and loved his job. He enjoyed the regular frequency at which a train passed by the signal box and embraced the responsibility of controlling the movement of trains. He freely admitted his biggest mistake was applying for the night staff position, but at the time the idea appealed to him. A week of 11-hour shifts and then a week off. Half a year's work for half a year's pay. The position sounded ideal, but no one had warned him about the nightly passes, as Dave eventually called them. He'd tried for years to revert back to day shifts, but the prison repeatedly denied him due to the lack of interest in filling his position on nights. Dave settled in to sorting the mess of newspapers, folders and train movement sheets that were scattered around the console. He jumped slightly a few minutes later as his radio shouted at him.
Receive Tango 1. Hello November 2 from Control. Staff train ready to leave. Control over.
Dave's eyes moved to the monitor overlooking the staff platform. On the screen, he saw the brightly lit platform, its small shelter completely empty apart from one person, a night officer who Dave knew to have the Tango 1 call sign. The officer was pacing the platform, radio in hand, no doubt waiting for the go-ahead from Control to wave the driver on his way, so he could return to the warmth of the prison building. Dave pressed his radio transmit button from within its pouch and spoke loudly to the empty room.
Receive Control. Opening gates now.
Then a short pause before...
Okay, Tango 1, go ahead with your move now. Control standing by.
Dave watched as the officer on the platform walked quickly toward the bottom of the screen, waving at someone before disappearing out of sight. Dave knew he had about 3 minutes before the train passed and therefore did not have to rush to open the gates on the level crossing. It was the one thing about working at the signal box that kept him from quitting the job. The level crossing was an old-fashioned swing gate. He knew full well it would only be a matter of time before the prison service caught up and modernized the gates with an automated system like they had with the junction point, which was now controlled by one of the buttons on his control board. He preferred the lever, but that was replaced years ago. Dave lazily lifted himself out of the chair and took a last swig of his coffee before walking to the door, putting on his jacket, and venturing out into the night. The air was cool this night, and he didn't really need his jacket but wore it more for comfort. He walked down the stairs of the signal box, grateful for the massive floodlights lighting up the level crossing. He walked to the large wooden gates and moved them one by one to close off the road. He didn't worry about cars. You were lucky to see 5 of them pass through during the daytime, let alone in the dead of night. Once the last gate was in place, he leaned against it while waiting for the train to pass. The night was quiet, save for the sound of grasshoppers chirping away. Dave glanced at his watch and noted the time on the digital face read 20:42. Quite a flyer for the evening duty staff, he thought to himself. They don't finish till 9:30. Glancing down the track towards the prison, he could just make out 2 headlights in the distance. The lights came closer and grew larger until the train rumbled past him. Dave mused to himself how even after 16 years in the job, he still got that twinge of excitement every time a train passed. Tonight, it was the usual EWS Class 8 shunter, pulling a single well-lit carriage busy with people inside. Dave watched as the train passed by and began to shrink away in the distance, leaving him alone at the crossing. He took his time closing the gates, then ambled slowly towards the steps leading into the signal box. That's it for now until about 6:15 tomorrow, he thought to himself. That's not true, a little voice said to him from the back of his mind. There is another train, the voice reminded him. He shivered at the thought and whispered to himself, but I won't have to open the gates for that one. The next couple of hours passed quickly for Dave. He took a Tom Clancy novel out of his bag and read a few chapters. Then he had a quick catnap. He was just debating whether to eat his pot noodle when the big red light labelled "Open Gates, Approaching Train" on the console started flashing and buzzing. That signal was only ever triggered by an approaching train down the track. Dave froze, as he had every night since he took on the night's officer job a decade ago. He quickly hit the reset button and peered over the top of the control board, staring intently at the well-lit level crossing in front of him. He noted that the gates were shut to any oncoming train. Dave sat immobile in his chair. He noticed his breathing had become more rapid and his heart was beating harder and harder inside his chest. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as he waited. And waited. Suddenly, a flash of green passed through the gates, somewhat like a streak of green smoke, but without the transparent, airy quality. Its sudden appearance brought with it an eruption of noise, a loud chug, chug, chug and whooshing sound as it sped across the level crossing, making Dave flinch with shock. The green train passed quickly, followed by flashes of bright windows going at such a speed no detail of the carriages inside could be made out. As always, Dave counted 4 carriages. Then the scene faded to nothing, leaving only the fading chug, chug, chug sound. This was the part that Dave hated the most. He considered covering his ears as he usually did, but decided to listen in hope that tonight may be different. The chug, chug, chug was almost out of earshot when, as usual, he heard a loud, gravelly crunching sound, quickly followed by the unearthly clanging of metal twisting and breaking. The sound seemed to crescendo in slow motion before stopping completely. Out of the ensuing silence, he heard the rising chorus of women crying and screaming, until they too faded away and were replaced once again by the eerie silence. Dave's gaze travelled across the expanse of the level crossing. The gates remained intact, and the level crossing appeared as it had not 30 seconds earlier. He relaxed back into his chair, his shaking hand reaching for his mug, which was resting on the control board. He felt dazed and stunned at what he'd just witnessed, even though he'd witnessed it every shift he'd worked in the past 10 years. He understood now, and it had taken him many years to admit it to himself, that this was a ghost train. That every night he was watching a ghostly replay of the excruciating seconds leading up to the infamous train derailment that occurred 92 years prior, just past the level crossing at Signal's End. That brings us to the end of this episode. We truly hope you enjoyed this tale of a ghostly train replaying the tragic events of a long ago night. If you would like to hear more of James's work, stay tuned to Haunted UK Fiction, as he graciously provided another fantastic story, which we plan to release at a later date. If you have an original story that would send a chill down our spines and you would like to submit it for review, simply send it in to hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. That's hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. Until next time, stay safe and take care.